Newsmaker Sunday with Fox 10's John Hook.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Sunday. We saw the State of the Union with the President last week, and we thought it would be very interesting to have a Democratic member of Congress from Arizona to come in and talk to us about that, about the immigration issue, about this FISA memo that came out Friday. A bombshell, maybe not, but we're going to talk about all of this and immigration with Ruben Gallego. Congress since 2014, and of course, served in the Arizona legislature before that and served our country proudly in the Marines. Appreciate your service to the country, and great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about the FISA memo, first of all. It comes out Friday. I want to get your take on it. Was it pretty much, you had seen it, you had gone over there because you have security clearance?
Yeah, I have top secret clearance, so I went and read it in our secret compartmentalized, it's called the SCIF, so that way you can't send out any messages, or messages come in and pick up what's happening. When I read it, it read like something that was not very well prepared. It was quickly put together, and it was designed with the end goal of essentially kneecapping the Mueller investigation, specifically targeting Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein. And because Rosenstein is essentially in charge of Mueller, I believe that this memo, which was written by Republican House Intel staff, sent to Republican Republican House members that are on the Intel Committee, was essentially designed as just a precursor to try to
undermine
the whole investigation.
Okay, absolutely. A couple things first. Do you believe that there's any compromising of national security in that memo? That was one of the arguments for not releasing it.
I don't think that there's any compromising of national security in terms of the actual information that's there. What is being compromised is the trust between our professionals in the Intel community and the politicians. Because right now, essentially what Nunes and the Republican Party and President Trump are doing are saying that our intelligence community is not acting impartial, that they're attacking politicians, and that they're using intelligence gathering information for partisan reasons. And the fact that we willy-nilly just released this memo without their review and approval is going to make it more difficult for us, one, to retain really good FBI professionals as well as CIA and other intelligence committee professionals, and two, probably make it harder for them to actually be honest with their politicians because they're afraid that we're always going to be, for one reason or another, trying to declassify any of their actions and works.
For political reasons.
For political gain.
Are you concerned, though, that in that memo, it seems pretty clear there are some people at the FBI who don't like President Trump, or even Steele, who compiled the dossier, who made it very clear that he did not want to see Trump as president. Does that trouble you that there's a politicization happening in our intelligence community?
Well, there's always been a politicization in terms of people having political opinion, but I do trust that they are going to be professional in their conduct. And maybe they make bad decisions, and you saw that happening with Secretary Clinton and Director Comey coming out with his opinion 11 days before the election, to the detriment of Secretary Clinton. But I do believe that in their hearts, they're all professional and continue being professional. What is occurring, unfortunately, is I do think what Trump is doing is breaking down that wall where Department of Justice and the FBI are away, and they are basically untouched by politics, and he is trying to put his finger on it. And we've seen that because he's tried to ask for loyalty from Director Comey. We now know he's asked for loyalty from McCabe. And that is not normal. Presidents do not do that.
Let me ask you about that. I know you don't like the president, but do you think that some of this may be naivete on his part, that he may be doing this because he doesn't know better, that he's acting as a CEO, which has been really his life's work, that he doesn't understand, honestly, the ways of Washington, and some of these mistakes are made not out of maliciousness, but out of ignorance?
Well, that would have been okay, in the beginning, but now we know that there has been consistent action that actually has proven that what he is doing is malicious. For example,
you're talking cover-up now.
Cover-up, or at a minimum, what he is doing is wrong, and there's different ways that when it comes to the president that is classified. But for example, we knew at first that there was some type of meeting between the Russians and the administration, the campaign, I should say. There was consistent denials about that, but finally they came forward because they were about to get exposed, and they said, okay, yes, we lied before, yes, we did meet with the Russians, but we didn't talk about the campaign. Then they have to retract that and say, yes, actually we did talk about the campaign, but we decided not to do anything with it. Then the president, now we know the president was actually involved in changing the story about why they even met in the first place. What we're seeing are acts of someone who is doing what I would say acts that are potentially illegal. At a minimum, he should stop all his actions in terms of obstruction of justice or hiding what occurred.
Do you believe we're talking about impeachable offenses here?
We're not there yet.
I mean, even Dianne Feinstein has said, I see no evidence of collusion so far.
I don't think she actually fully understands what she's saying, to be honest, because I think...
Have you seen?
I've seen the evidence. I think that most everyone has seen. What I can tell you is that I believe there are already actions that could justify obstruction of justice if they are proven true. The case for impeachment and the order of impeachment essentially ends up being a question of Congress, not of the prosecutor. So whenever Mueller is done, he's not going to say, I recommend impeachment. That will be our decision.
Right.
And until I actually get that full report, I actually can't endorse anything, an impeachment clause.
Let me ask you, a cynic would say that the Democrat strategy right now for the midterms is to not do a lot, wait it out, try to win the election, get enough votes in the House and maybe the Senate to impeach in the House and convict in the Senate. Is that the strategy?
Well, that'd be a really stupid strategy because hitting impeachment numbers in terms of just like the logical how many votes you need, both in the House and the Senate, are extremely difficult. We'd have to have a wave.
You've got colleagues you work with who are openly talking about this.
I believe those colleagues are doing a disservice by talking in such a prejudicial manner. We need to see the investigation go all the way through. We need Mueller to actually come out with verifiable evidence.
Do you believe he will? Do you think the president will allow that to happen?
Well, if the president doesn't allow it to happen, then that is an impeachable cause because it is obstructed justice.
So you believe he will not fire Mueller at this point?
If he fires Mueller, then
game on.
It's game on. That you've done an impeachable act.
Let's talk about the State of the Union, and I've got a quick recap here, and then I want you to react to it. Here, take a look. This is tape number 2.
President Trump largely stuck to the prompter last night here on Capitol Hill. This was a relatively lengthy address, clocking in at about an hour and 20 minutes. No big surprises, but the division in Congress was evident.
President Trump welcomed as he entered the House chamber for this first State of the Union address. Taking to the podium, he began with a reaffirmation of his driving belief, America first.
We have gone forward with a clear vision and a righteous mission to make America great again for all Americans.
As expected, the president did pump up the economy, but even in that effort, the division in Congress was clear.
African American unemployment stands at the lowest rate ever recorded.
Members of the Congressional Black Caucus sat stone-faced, and applause on the Democratic side of the aisle was predictably sparse throughout the night. Some even boycotted the speech. Now, the president did talk about working with Democrats to fund new infrastructure projects and tackle immigration reform.
So let's come together, set politics aside, and finally get the job done.
He did not bring up the ongoing Russia probe, but as he left the chamber, he was asked by one GOP lawmaker to release a controversial memo said to detail FBI abuses in the investigation.
Let's release the memo. Oh, don't worry. 100%.
100%, he said, although the White House says he is still mulling it over. The Democratic response was left to Massachusetts Congressman Joe Kennedy, speaking from a vocational school.
Bullies may land a punch. They may leave a mark, but they have never, not once in the history of our United States, managed to match the strength and spirit of a people united in defense of their future.
And there is not much time, though, for a victory lap for the president. Now, there is another government shutdown looming next week on February 8th in Washington. Doug Luzader, Fox News.
Arizona Congressman Ruben Gallego, District 7, is our guest on Newsmaker Sunday. He's been in Congress since 2014, Democrat from in this district's really southern, western, downtown Phoenix, along with a portion of Glendale. You guys, the Democrats, were kind of sitting on your hands during the whole speech. Is there any common ground with this president that you can find?
Well, we've tried common ground. The problem is that his office, his administration, is really being run by some very naive hands. For example, Republicans and Democrats, senators and members of Congress have approached the White House about compromise when it comes to the Dreamers, compromise when it comes to government funding, and while we've had some level of agreement, it usually is pulled back later by somebody in the White House. And the president will have these grandiose statements. For example, do you remember a couple of weeks back he had the big meeting and round table with all the Democrats, all the Republicans on the camera saying, you send me a bill and I will sign that bill to deal with the Dreamers. So that was done, and next thing you know...
Schumer and
then he took back his word. So it's hard for us to compromise with somebody who I don't think he actually understands.
It's a moving target.
It's a very moving target. I don't think he understands. And I think he's got divisions even within his own administration.
Let's talk about the Dreamers here, because this is a big issue. Your family,
my friends,
you know this issue well.
Yeah.
Take a look. We're going to watch cut number 3, the president talking about the Dreamers.
The first pillar of our framework generously offers a path to citizenship for 1.8 million illegal immigrants who were brought here by their parents at a young age. That covers almost 3 times more people than the previous administration covered. Based on these discussions, we presented Congress with a detailed proposal that should be supported by both parties as a fair compromise, one where nobody gets everything they want, but where our country gets the critical reforms it needs and must have.
Isn't this the art of the deal? I mean, isn't this, if he's tripling the number that even the Gang of 8 had, isn't that an olive branch saying you're going to get a lot of people normalized by doing this?
Well, it's the art of the deal. Also make sure you understand what the rest of the deal is, right? And what he's not telling you is how much money we're going to waste on a border wall. You know, billions and billions and billions of dollars. We're talking almost $25 billion.
That's over 10 years, though.
Over 10 years. Still $25 billion that we have to pay as U.S. citizens
don't you think we should secure that border?
Versus Mexico, where he said he was going to pay it. And yes, you actually secure the border. This is why we're against a border wall. Border wall is not security. We actually have come to the president with actual border security arrangements, more funding for Border Patrol, more funding for different types of barriers and technology, things that actually we know reduces illegal crossings.
I think even he now, Congressman, is not really talking about a continuous border wall. It's not practical. It's impossible, actually.
Well, he talks about it, and then he pulls it back, and then he talks about it again. Look, there's been offers even for border walls from Senator Schumer, and that was also taken off the ground.
Break it down for me. What's happening? Is his heart in the right place, but he's getting pulled back by factions within the White House who say, you can't do that, Mr. President, because you promised this before?
No, I mean, the president's just incompetent, and and he's not good at this job, and he has surrounded himself with people that are also not good at this job. John Kelly, his chief of staff, is not a good legislator. He's never been in the legislature. He doesn't know how to compromise deals. He doesn't see when there's a good deal coming. Now, the rest of that deal that you're talking about also has to do with increasing the amount of deportations in other areas, changing 70 years' worth of immigration policies that we believe would entirely make this problem even worse into the future.
So for the cynic who says, and you've seen this in the press a lot, that for the Democrats this is an issue simply because of trying to inflate your voter rolls down the line, that these are voters for you guys.
These are Americans for us. More importantly, this is the heart and soul of this country. We've always been a welcoming country to immigrants. The way that we want to do this is to actually, you know, first of all, if we have to just deal with the Dreamer issue, we will deal with the Dreamers and legalize them. If you want to have an overall conversation about comprehensive immigration reform, we can have that. But we want to have comprehensive immigration reform so we don't have to deal with this 10 years from now again.
You'd like to take the Dreamer part of this out,
Absolutely.
do it separately.
Absolutely.
Is that coming, do you believe, or do you think this will all be kind of work together?
I think this will end up being just specifically dealing within the population of Dreamers. First, because we also do recognize the president has essentially set this up so that way the Dreamers are essentially the hostages. And at some point, we are not going to continue down a road where we're going to essentially change wholesale immigration policy for the last 70 years that we've had in this country for a population that we know we can easily fix with just you know, a bipartisan bill that is very popular right now in the House and the Senate. There are bills, again, there are bipartisan bills that will get the 218 votes in the House, that will get the 60 votes in the Senate, and if the president signed, we would have this deal done tomorrow. They just have to know how to accept that.
We're going to take a break here on Newsmaker Sunday. When we come back, we're going to talk about the economy, the tax cuts, and what Congressman Gallego feels about that and whether it was a good or bad move. Back in a minute on Newsmaker Sunday. Back on Newsmaker Sunday with Democratic Congressman Ruben Gallego from Arizona, and he was first elected to Congress, as we mentioned, in 2014. And he's been a pretty staunch opponent of President Trump. So we're talking about a lot of the issues that are out there right now. Before we move on to the tax cuts, I do want to talk about the Dreamers one more moment here. Sure. Representative Tom Cole, you may know. He said, frankly, Republicans should hold their ground and refuse to take the bait. In my opinion, if Democrats refuse to negotiate in good faith, Republicans should put President Trump's bill on the floor and dare Democrats to vote against it.
Well, his problem is that he doesn't know how the count is. He wouldn't even have support among the Republican caucus for the current president's bill. So if he wants to play that game, we can. But within the own Republican caucus, some believe that the president's bill is too harsh. And then there is a big, I would say, majority of Republicans that think it's too generous. So the only way you actually pass any immigration bill is you get Democrats to work with moderate Republicans.
If what you said is true, that there's people on his right who are angry that it doesn't go far enough, and people on the left of him who say
within his own party,
that he's kind of striking the middle ground.
No, that's not how you do legislation. You do legislation to actually pass it. If you want to pass it in a bipartisan manner, you get the votes. You get 218 votes,
but
yes.
If he's got guys in his own party angry with him, is he not trying to find the middle?
If he is, he's totally missing it, because the middle means you are able to pass legislation. And the way you pass legislation, you have 218 votes, mixture of Democrats and Republicans, and 60 senators.
You don't think he's there? You don't think it will happen?
I don't think he could get any more than 140 votes.
Do you guys, Democrats, want to not get a deal before the midterms?
No, of course we want a deal. We've been trying to get comprehensive immigration reform for many years. We'd love nothing more to get immigration reform done. But right now, let's focus on the DREAM Act. We would love nothing more to make sure that 800,000 people get to stay here. We don't separate families, right? And we've offered many compromises. We've offered millions and billions of dollars in border security. We've talked about even changing family reunification law specifically for the Dreamer community. The problem that you have, again, is the White House that doesn't know what they want, and what they finally have decided they want is not going to pass. It's not going to pass the way they think, because they don't have the votes right now. And it's not just because of us, it's because the Republicans won't even vote for it.
Let's talk about, he talked about the future of detainees, and you were a Marine. You fought these guys. You fought against Islamic extremists, and you've been there. He's talking about what to do with enemy combatants in Guantanamo Bay. Take a look.
And when captured overseas, they should be treated like the terrorists they are. In the past, we have foolishly released hundreds and hundreds of dangerous terrorists, only to meet them again on the battlefield, including the ISIS leader, al-Baghdadi, who we captured, who we had, who we released. So today, I'm keeping another promise. I just signed, prior to walking in, an order directing Secretary Mattis, who is doing a great job. Thank you. To re-examine our military detention policy and to keep open the detention facilities in Guantanamo Bay.
Arizona Congressman Ruben Gallego, your reaction to that?
Well, he's also complaining a couple of things. Al-Baghdadi actually was never in Guantanamo Bay, so the fact that he's kind of putting that and mixing in there is, you know, to scare people. He was actually held in Iraq, in an Iraqi prison, and released by the Iraqis. That aside,
the point about meeting some of these guys again on the battlefield.
I mean, it's very certainly true situation, and most of the time what we've have found was that the ones that have met again on the battlefield ended up, you know, being dead. But one of the things that we have to understand is we're not going to actually get ourselves safer by having these men in Guantanamo. It's not like we just going to release them in the public. We have federal penitentiary, we have courts. The problem with Guantanamo Bay is that right now, none of these men are being convicted because you're dealing with military law that even military lawyers themselves don't know how to convict them.
Right, because they don't represent a country.
They don't represent a country.
They represent an ideology.
Right, and they're being represented by our own military. So these terrorists have our own military lawyers
You
as their
favor
courts.
closing Guantanamo?
I'm in favor of either closing Guantanamo and transferring them to military bases in the U.S. or federal penitentiary like we have other terrorists. This is just silly that somehow because they're there, it makes a difference. Or we need to clearly define what we're going to do with this population. Because what's happening right now is they're in trials and trials and trials, and nothing's being decided. And we're not you're going to hear this from these people like, why don't we just shoot them? Like, because we don't do that to prisoners. We're the United States.
Yeah, and as a former Marine who served this country with distinction, I think your opinion matters on these kinds of issues.
I mean, when and if you want to talk about what is the safest way for us to be able to conduct, war, when other countries know that we're a just country and we use our judicial system in a manner that is consistent with norms, we are most likely to have allies. But when we start doing things like this just for political reasons because people are scared, it doesn't make us any safer.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that explanation. Arizona Congressman Ruben Gallego, when we come back, we will talk about the tax cuts.
Okay, right.
And your thoughts about whether that was a good move or a bad move, because people are starting to feel it now in their paychecks. Back in a minute on Newsmaker Sunday. Back with Arizona Congressman Ruben Gallego. Final moments on Newsmaker Sunday. Let's show tape number 6. President Trump signing the tax cut.
Yeah.
He was kind of down on the mat right before the end of the year. He gets the tax cut, one major legislative victory. Republicans say it's a once-in-a-generation kind of thing. What's your take on the tax cuts? Because 90% of Americans are going to see more money in their paycheck. That can't be a bad thing, right?
Well, of course, it's not a bad thing, but it could have been better. I think this is going to be a once-in-a-generation issue, and you're right, because they're going to end up bankrupting a big portion or causing a big dip or increase in our deficit, which eventually they're going to turn around and ask for more cuts, whether it's going to be to Social Security or it's going to come to Medicare or Medicaid. You'll see that coming in the future. Already, let me give you an example. The debt limit vote is supposed to be happening in April. Now we have to move it back to March because we started giving away so much money that we're going to have to increase the debt limit and start borrowing money earlier than we're supposed to. Number two, if we want to talk about investments, the president also talked to the State of the Union about putting $1.5 trillion worth of investments into infrastructure. We could have done that. We could have done debt financing for infrastructure, but we didn't. Instead, we did debt financing for tax cuts, supposedly from the party that's supposed to be fiscally responsible. Now, all of a sudden, it's okay for us to have huge deficits.
But is it possible? Let's take tape number 7, Apple. Apple repatriates $82 billion back into the United States, money that was overseas, not being taxed here. That $82 billion goes right into the U.S. Treasury. Is it possible that we are going to see a boon here in the United States that may cover and paper over some of this stuff? That we might actually get a surplus?
Not according to the Congressional Budget Office and to almost every economic think tank. Most of these companies are going to have already basically baked in those numbers into their finances. They were using that money overseas for expansion. You've already seen, for example, Walmart, who, on one hand gave $1,000 bonuses, but then at the same time started closing and laying off tens of thousands of workers. So you're seeing a lot of things happening. Already, you're seeing unemployment numbers changing. Last year, around January timeframe, there was more people, our unemployment numbers were higher. This year, they're already lower. You're already seeing the deficit, as I was telling you, and debt increasing. So at the end of the day, what we see is $1.5 trillion hole in deficit. It's probably going to end up being more, and I think it's not going to have the economic impact. It will increase stock shares. Companies will have higher profitability. That does not translate into higher wages, though.
Final moments on Newsmaker Sunday. Do you think the president survives this term?
I think he does. It doesn't mean that he is not in trouble. I think that, when impeachment, should it ever come, it's going to come at a very slow pace. It's going to be judicious. We're going to do it right, and we're going to make sure that American people have justice.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. And thank you for your service.
My pleasure.
Thank you. We're back with Ruben Gallego at some point in the future on Newsmaker Sunday. You're welcome back anytime. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.